the voice of hope who couldn't save her own. Emergency dispatcher Riley Patterson had spent 15 years being the steady voice that people heard in their worst moments. She'd talked a mother through delivering a baby in a car, guided a father through stopping his child's bleeding, and coordinated the rescue of hundreds of trapped accident victims. But when the call came in about a multi-car pileup on Highway 85, Riley recognized the license plate number being reported. It was her husband's car, and her 2 daughters were supposed to be with him. Welcome to Justice System, USA, where we explore the human cost of serving others in America's emergency response system. I'm your host, and today we're examining a story that asks, what happens when the person who saves everyone else can't save the people who matter most? Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, and if you believe these stories of sacrifice deserve to be heard, subscribe and join our community that honors those who serve, the voice everyone trusted. Riley Patterson sat in the emergency dispatch center of Clark County, Nevada, wearing the same calm expression that had defined her professional identity for 15 years. At 38, she was the senior dispatcher on the night shift, the one supervisors assigned to the most critical calls because of her legendary ability to remain composed under pressure. The dispatch center was a high-tech command hub filled with multiple computer monitors, radio equipment, and phone systems that connected Riley to police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and citizens throughout the Las Vegas metropolitan area. She wore a headset that allowed her to communicate with multiple emergency responders simultaneously, while tracking their locations on digital maps and monitoring their radio traffic. Riley was a petite woman with shoulder-length brown hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, bright green eyes that missed nothing, and a voice that had become legendary among first responders. Her tone was always calm, professional, and reassuring, regardless of the chaos happening on the other end of the line. New dispatchers were trained to study Riley's call recordings to learn proper emergency communication techniques. Her desk was meticulously organized, reflecting the precision that made her so effective in coordinating complex emergency responses. Photos of her family were displayed prominently. Her husband, Marcus, a construction foreman with a gentle smile and strong hands, and their 2 daughters, Grace, 10, and Lily, 7. Both blonde like their father, with Riley's green eyes and infectious laughter. Riley's career statistics were impressive by any measure. She had processed over 45,000 emergency calls, coordinated responses to everything from minor fender benders to mass casualty events, and maintained a perfect record for dispatch accuracy and response time. More importantly, she had a gift for talking people through crisis situations with a combination of technical knowledge and emotional intelligence that saved lives regularly. Her most famous save had occurred 3 years earlier when a suicidal man had called 911 from the top of a downtown parking garage. While police negotiators were en route, Riley kept the man on the phone for 47 minutes, gradually building rapport and talking him away from the edge. The call had been used in training programs across the country as an example of excellent crisis intervention. Riley's ability to compartmentalize was extraordinary. She could guide a parent through CPR on their child, knowing statistically that the child might not survive, while maintaining the calm professionalism necessary to give clear instructions and coordinate paramedic response. She had learned to process the emotional weight of her job during her off hours, protecting her professional effectiveness from personal feelings. Her work schedule was demanding, 12-hour shifts, 4 days a week with mandatory overtime during major incidents or staff shortages. The job paid well enough to support her family comfortably, but it required sacrifices that affected every aspect of her personal life. Riley had missed family dinners, school events, and weekend activities because of her work schedule. Marcus had learned to manage most parenting responsibilities independently, and Grace and Lily had grown accustomed to their mother being absent during many of their important moments. Riley justified these sacrifices by focusing on the lives she saved and the families she helped through their worst days. But the nature of emergency dispatch work also meant that Riley was intimately familiar with how quickly normal life could become tragic. She had taken calls from parents who found their children dead from SIDS, from wives whose husbands died in workplace accidents, and from families whose lives were destroyed by drunk drivers, house fires, and random violence. This professional exposure to tragedy had made Riley both more appreciative of her own family's safety and more anxious about the fragility of their normal life. She insisted that Marcus and the girls text her whenever they arrived safely at destinations, call if they were running late, and avoid activities that she knew from experience could be dangerous. The irony was that Riley's expertise in emergency response had made her hyper-vigilant about her family's safety, even as her work schedule reduced her ability to protect them directly. The shift that changed everything. October 15th started as a typical Friday night shift for Riley. She arrived at the dispatch center at 6 p.m. to relieve the day shift dispatcher, reviewed the status of ongoing incidents, and settled in for what she expected to be a busy evening. Friday nights in Las Vegas always generated high call volumes. Domestic disputes, bar fights, drunk driving accidents, and overdoses were predictable weekend patterns. Marcus had texted Riley before her shift began, letting her know that he was taking Grace and Lily to dinner and a movie at the Century 16 Theater Complex on the east side of town. It was a monthly tradition. They had started to give the girls special time with their father while Riley worked. Her weekend shifts. Girls are excited about the new animated movie, Marcus had written. Should be home by 10:30. Love you. Riley had responded with her usual reminder, drive safe. Text me when you get there and when you're leaving. Love you all. The first few hours of Riley's shift were routine. A few minor traffic accidents, several noise complaints, 2 domestic disturbance calls, and 1 medical emergency involving an elderly man having chest pains. Riley coordinated responses efficiently, maintaining her characteristic calm while directing police officers, paramedics, and firefighters to various locations throughout the county. At 9:23 p.m., Riley received a call that would initially seem unremarkable, a report of a multi-vehicle accident on Highway 85 just east of the city limits. The caller was a truck driver who had witnessed the collision and pulled over to check for injuries. 911. What's your emergency? Riley answered in her standard professional tone. Yeah, I need to report a major accident on Highway 85, eastbound. "Near mile marker 47, the caller said, his voice shaky from adrenaline. "Looks like maybe 4 or 5 cars involved. I can see at least one vehicle on fire, and there's people who look hurt pretty bad." Riley immediately began coordinating the emergency response while gathering additional details. "I'm dispatching fire, paramedics, and police to your location. Can you tell me more about what you're seeing? How many vehicles are involved, and are there people trapped?" As the caller provided more details, Riley entered information into her computer system and began directing emergency units to the scene. Highway 85 was a major route that connected Las Vegas to several suburban communities, and serious accidents there often involved significant injuries and complicated rescue operations. "I can see the license plates on a couple of the cars," the caller continued. "One of them is a silver Honda sedan, Nevada plate ... He read off a series of letters and numbers that Riley typed into her incident report. The license plate number was NSK 4792. Riley's hands froze over her keyboard as she recognized the plate number instantly. It was Marcus's car. At Justice System, USA. We explore the moments when professional duty collides with personal crisis. If this story is gripping you, share it with someone who understands the weight of responsibility that first responders carry every day. The impossible moment. For several seconds, Riley's mind simply refused to process what she had heard. The license plate number NSK 4792 belonged to the silver Honda Accord that Marcus drove to work every day, the car he had taken Grace and Lily to dinner in less than 3 hours earlier. Riley's first instinct was to believe she had misheard the caller or that he had misread the license plate. The statistical probability that her own family would be involved in a major accident during her shift seemed impossibly remote. But as she stared at the plate number on her computer screen, she knew with absolute certainty that her husband and daughters were somewhere in the wreckage being described by the truck driver. Her professional training demanded that she continue coordinating the emergency response. Fire trucks, paramedics, and police officers were already en route to the scene, and additional callers were beginning to report the same accident. Riley needed to establish incident command, coordinate traffic control, and ensure that adequate resources were being deployed to handle what appeared to be a mass casualty event. But her personal instincts screamed at her to abandon her post, drive to Highway 85, and search for her family herself. Every parental fiber in her body demanded that she drop everything and race to the scene to help Marcus, Grace, and Lily. Riley found herself paralyzed between two equally powerful imperatives: her professional responsibility to coordinate the emergency response for all victims of the accident, and her personal need to focus exclusively on saving her own family. The dispatcher protocol was clear. Emergency personnel were forbidden from responding to incidents involving their own family members because emotional investment compromised professional judgment. Riley was supposed to immediately notify her supervisor and request replacement by another dispatcher who could handle the incident objectively, but requesting replacement would take at least 15 minutes, during which time the emergency response would be delayed or compromised. People were trapped in burning vehicles, and every minute of delay could mean the difference between life and death for multiple families. Riley made a split-second decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. She would continue coordinating the emergency response while fighting to remain professionally objective, even knowing that her own family was among the victims. The Professional Response, Unit 47. "This is dispatch," Riley said into her headset, her voice maintaining its characteristic calm despite the terror building in her chest. "I have you responding to a multi-vehicle accident on Highway 85 eastbound at mile marker 47. Caller reports 4 to 5 vehicles involved with at least one vehicle on fire and multiple injuries." "Copy, dispatch, Unit 47. En route," came the response from the fire truck racing toward the scene where Riley's family was trapped. Riley continued gathering information from additional callers while coordinating the deployment of emergency resources. Each new detail about the accident felt like a physical blow. The silver Honda was completely smashed. There were children's voices crying, and the fire was spreading to multiple vehicles. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed incident updates, but her voice remained steady as she communicated with responding units. Years of training had created muscle memory that allowed her to perform her job, even while experiencing overwhelming personal crisis. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23. Came a call from the first police officer to arrive at the scene. We have a major MVA with multiple vehicles and confirmed entrapment. I need additional fire and rescue units, and we're going to need life flight for at least 2 victims." Life flight helicopters were reserved for the most critically injured patients who needed immediate transport to trauma centers. Hearing that request made Riley's stomach clench with terror, but she responded professionally. "Copy, Unit 23. I am dispatching additional fire and rescue units and requesting life flight activation." Riley wanted desperately to ask about specific vehicles or request information about victims in the silver Honda, but she knew that such requests would compromise her professional objectivity and potentially interfere with the rescue operation. Instead, she focused on ensuring that every available resource was being deployed to the scene. Multiple fire trucks, advanced life support paramedics, police units for traffic control, and specialized rescue equipment for vehicle extraction. The waiting as emergency units arrived at the scene and began reporting their findings. Riley found herself listening to radio traffic about her own family's accident with the same professional detachment she brought to every other emergency call. "Dispatch, Unit 47, we have multiple vehicle extractions in progress," came the report from the fire captain coordinating the rescue. "Vehicle 1 is a red pickup truck with 2 occupants, both conscious and responsive. Vehicle 2 is a silver sedan with 3 occupants. 2 appear to be juvenile females. All 3 are unconscious, but showing vital signs. The silver sedan with 2 juvenile females could only be Marcus's Honda with Grace and Lily." Riley's hands clenched into fists as she fought to maintain professional composure while learning that her family was unconscious and trapped in wreckage. "Copy, Unit 47, Riley responded, her voice betraying no emotion. "What's your ETA for vehicle extraction?" "Dispatch, we're using hydraulic rescue tools now." "ETA for extraction, approximately 15 minutes for the sedan. We have life flight landing in 10 minutes for immediate transport." 15 minutes felt like an eternity when Riley knew that her unconscious daughters were trapped in a damaged vehicle, But she also knew that the fire department's rescue protocols were designed to maximize victim survival, and that rushing the extraction could cause additional injuries. Riley continued coordinating the overall emergency response while fighting the urge to abandon her post and drive to the scene. Additional accidents were being reported throughout the county, and other families were depending on her professional expertise to coordinate help for their emergencies. The psychological torture of maintaining professional objectivity while knowing that her own family was fighting for their lives was unlike anything Riley had experienced in 15 years of emergency dispatch. She felt as though she was betraying Marcus, Grace, and Lily by not focusing exclusively on their rescue, but she also knew that abandoning her post would compromise help for other families in crisis. The reports over the next 30 minutes, Riley received periodic updates about the extraction and medical status of the accident victims. Each report provided more details about her family's condition while testing her ability to remain professionally functional. Dispatch Unit 47, we have successful extraction of all occupants from the silver sedan, came the crucial update. Adult. Male approximately 40 years old, conscious but with apparent internal injuries. 2 juvenile females, approximately 7 and 10 years old, 1 conscious and responsive, 1 unconscious with head trauma. All 3 are being prepared for life-flight transport. Riley closed her eyes for a moment, processing the information that one of her daughters was unconscious with head trauma while maintaining her professional responsibilities. The detail that Marcus was conscious provided some relief, but the reference to internal injuries suggested serious damage. Copy Unit 47, Riley responded. What's the ETA for life flight transport? Dispatch life flight is loading patients. Now, ETA to University Medical Center Trauma Unit approximately 12 minutes. University Medical Center was the regional trauma hospital where the most seriously injured patients were taken. Riley knew from her professional experience that transport there indicated life-threatening injuries that required immediate surgical intervention. As life flight departed the scene with her family, Riley faced another agonizing decision. Should she request immediate relief so she could rush to the hospital, or should she continue her shift to ensure that other emergency responses weren't compromised? Her shift supervisor, Tom Crawford, approached her workstation during a brief lull in radio traffic. Riley, I just got word about the Highway 85 accident. I know that was Marcus's car. Why didn't you call for relief immediately? Because people needed help, and I was the best person to coordinate that help, Riley replied, her voice steady, but her hands still trembling slightly. Jesus, Riley, that was your family. You should have stepped away immediately. That's protocol. Protocol doesn't save lives when there's no one qualified to replace me for 15 minutes during a mass casualty incident. Tom studied Riley's face, seeing the controlled anguish beneath her professional composure. I'm relieving you now. Go to the hospital. Janet will take over your console. The hospital. Riley arrived at University Medical Center 45 minutes after the life flight helicopter had landed. She raced through the emergency room entrance, still wearing her dispatch headset and uniform, looking for any information about Marcus, Grace, and Lily. The trauma unit was a controlled chaos of medical personnel, monitors, and equipment designed to save critically injured patients. Riley identified herself to the charge nurse and was directed to a family consultation room where she would wait for updates about her family's medical status. Dr. Jennifer Ramirez, the trauma surgeon who had been treating Riley's family, entered the consultation room with an expression that made Riley's heart sink. She was still wearing surgical scrubs marked with blood that could have belonged to Marcus, Grace, or Lily. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Dr. Ramirez. I've been treating your family since they arrived. Your husband Marcus has internal bleeding and several broken ribs, but we expect him to make a full recovery. He's stable and conscious, and he's been asking about you and the girls." Riley felt a wave of relief about Marcus, but Dr. Ramirez's expression suggested that Grace and Lily's conditions were more serious. "Grace has a concussion and a broken arm, but she's conscious and responsive. She's scared and asking for you. But her injuries aren't life-threatening. And Lily?" Riley asked, though she already suspected the answer from Dr. Ramirez's tone. "Lily sustained severe head trauma in the accident. We've stopped the immediate bleeding, but she's in a medically induced coma while we monitor brain swelling. The next 48 hours will be critical in determining the extent of any permanent damage." Riley's professional training had prepared her to deliver bad news to other families, but receiving it about her own daughter was devastating. 7-year-old Lily, who had been excited about seeing a movie with her father just hours earlier, was now fighting for her life in a hospital bed. At Justice System, USA. We believe that the most important stories are often the most personal ones. If this story is affecting you, share it with someone who understands the sacrifices that first responders and their families make every day. The vigil Riley spent the next 3 days alternating between Lily's bedside and the pediatric ICU and brief visits to Marcus and Grace, who were recovering in regular hospital rooms. The contrast between her professional experience with medical emergencies and her personal experience as a parent of a critically injured child was profound and disorienting. As a dispatchee, Riley had coordinated hundreds of responses to serious accidents and medical emergencies. She understood medical terminology, hospital procedures, and the statistical probabilities associated with various types of trauma. But as Lily's mother, all of that professional knowledge felt useless in the face of her own helplessness. Lily remained unconscious, connected to monitors that tracked her brain activity, heart rate, and other vital signs. Riley sat beside her bed for hours, holding her daughter's small hand and talking to her about school, friends, and family memories, hoping that some part of Lily could hear her voice. Marcus, despite his own injuries, tried to comfort Riley while managing his guilt about the accident. He had been driving carefully and within the speed limit when a drunk driver ran a red light and crashed into their car at high speed. The accident was completely beyond his control, but he struggled with survivor's guilt about Lily's more serious injuries. Grace was physically recovering well, but emotionally traumatized by seeing her younger sister unconscious and hooked to machines. She kept asking Riley when Lily would wake up and whether she would be normal again, questions that Riley couldn't answer honestly without terrifying her 10-year-old daughter. The most difficult aspect of the vigil was the waiting and uncertainty. Riley's professional experience had taught her that head trauma outcomes were unpredictable, and that even patients who survived could face long-term disabilities affecting their cognitive abilities, motor skills, and personality. she found herself, analyzing every beep of Lily's monitors, every change in her breathing pattern, and every word spoken by medical staff, using her emergency response training to try to assess her daughter's prognosis. But the hypervigilance that made her effective as a dispatcher became exhausting when applied to her personal crisis. The choice on the fourth day of Lily's hospitalization, Riley's supervisor Tom Crawford visited her at the hospital to discuss her work status. Riley had been on emergency leave since the night of the accident, and the dispatch center was operating with reduced staffing during her absence. "Riley, I need to know your intentions about returning to work," Tom said as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. "I understand that Lily's condition is still uncertain, but we're struggling to cover your shifts with qualified personnel." Riley had been dreading this conversation. She knew that her colleagues were working overtime to cover her responsibilities and that the dispatch center's effectiveness was compromised by her absence. But she also couldn't imagine leaving Lily's bedside while her daughter's life hung in the balance. "Tom, I can't come back while Lily is still unconscious. I need to be here." "I understand that, but I also need to consider the impact on emergency response throughout the country. Your absence affects every family that calls 911 during your normal shift hours." The conversation forced Riley to confront an agonizing reality. Her professional responsibilities to the community continued even during her personal crisis. Other families were depending on emergency dispatch services, and her prolonged absence potentially compromised their access to help during life-threatening emergencies. "How long can you hold my position?" Riley asked. "I can give you 2 more weeks of emergency leave, but after that I'll have to start the process of finding a permanent replacement." Riley realized that she was facing a choice between her career serving the community and her presence during her daughter's recovery. The job that had defined her identity for 15 years was incompatible with being the mother that Lily needed during this critical period. "I'll give you my decision in a week," Riley said at the awakening that evening. As Riley sat beside Lily's bed reading quietly, she noticed a change in her daughter's breathing pattern. Lily's eyes fluttered slightly, and her hand seemed to squeeze Riley's fingers with more pressure than the unconscious reflexes she had been showing. Riley called for the nurse, who quickly summoned Dr. Ramirez to assess Lily's neurological status. After several tests and examinations, Dr. Ramirez confirmed that Lily was beginning to regain consciousness. "This is very encouraging," Dr. Ramirez told Riley. "Her brain activity is increasing, and she's showing appropriate responses to stimuli. We'll need to monitor her progress closely, but this suggests that the swelling has decreased and her brain function is recovering." Over the next 24 hours, Lily gradually became more alert and responsive. She recognized Riley and Marcus Asp for water and seemed to remember basic information about her life before the accident. However, she also showed signs of cognitive impairment that suggested long-term effects from her brain injury. Lily had difficulty concentrating, problems with short-term memory, and episodes of confusion about where she was and what had happened. To her, Dr. Ramirez explained that these symptoms were common after traumatic brain injuries, and that Lily would require months of rehabilitation therapy to maximize her recovery. The relief of Lily's awakening was tempered by the realization that her daughter would need extensive ongoing care and support. The girl who had been excited about movies and school just a week earlier now struggled to remember conversations from an hour before and became easily frustrated by activities that had previously been simple for her. The decision with Lily conscious. But facing a long recovery process, Riley had to make the most difficult decision of her career. She could return to work and trust Marcus and other family members to provide care for Lily during her rehabilitation, or she could resign from her position to become Lily's full-time caregiver. Riley's professional identity had been built around her ability to help families during their worst moments. She had saved thousands of lives and coordinated emergency responses that protected her entire community. But now her own family needed her more than the community did. The irony was painful. Riley's expertise in emergency response had made her extraordinarily effective at helping other families in crisis, but that same demanding career had prevented her from being present when her own family faced their greatest emergency. Riley met with Tom Crawford and formally submitted her resignation from the dispatch center. The decision was agonizing but necessary. Lily's recovery would require years of therapy, medical appointments, and specialized care that was incompatible with the demanding schedule of emergency dispatch work. I've spent 15 years being the voice that people heard in their worst moments, Riley told Tom. But I can't be that voice for everyone else while my own daughter needs me to be her voice. The new life Riley's transition from emergency dispatcher to full-time caregiver was challenging in ways that her professional training hadn't prepared her for. Instead of coordinating responses to multiple crises simultaneously, she focused on the slow, patient work of helping Lily relearn basic skills that brain injury had affected. Lily's rehabilitation involved speech therapy to address communication problems, occupational therapy to relearn fine motor skills, and cognitive therapy to strengthen memory and concentration. Riley became an expert in brain injury recovery, learning medical terminology and treatment techniques that were completely different from her emergency response background. The financial impact of Riley's career change was significant. Her dispatcher salary had been the primary support for their family, and Marcus's construction work alone wasn't sufficient to cover their medical expenses and reduced income. They had to sell their house and move to a smaller apartment, adjust their lifestyle dramatically, and rely on family support to manage their new circumstances. But Riley also discovered that caring for Lily provided a different kind of satisfaction than her emergency dispatch career had offered. Instead of brief, intense interactions with families in crisis, she was able to provide sustained, nurturing support for her daughter's gradual recovery. Lily's progress was slow but measurable. She gradually regained most of her speech abilities, learned to compensate for memory problems, and developed coping strategies for the cognitive difficulties that would likely affect her permanently. She would never be exactly the same child she had been before the accident, but she was recovering far more successfully than doctors had initially predicted. At Justice System USA, we honor the sacrifices that families make when tragedy strikes, and the difficult choices between career and caregiving that many parents face. The reflection 3 years after the accident, Riley reflected on the choices she had made and the life she had built around Lily's recovery. Her daughter was now attending a special education program at school, making friends who accepted her differences and showing remarkable resilience in adapting to her changed abilities. Marcus had returned to full health and found work with a construction company that offered better benefits to help cover Lily's ongoing medical needs. Grace had grown into a protective older sister who helped Lily with homework and defended her from other children who didn't understand her. Challenges. Riley sometimes missed the adrenaline and purpose of emergency dispatch work. She had been extraordinarily good at her job, and she knew that her absence had affected the quality of emergency response in their community. Other families had possibly received slower or less effective help because Riley was no longer available to coordinate their emergencies, but she had no regrets about her decision to resign. Lily's recovery had required constant advocacy, medical coordination, and emotional support that wouldn't have been possible if Riley had continued working full-time. Her daughter's progress was evidence that she had made the right choice for her family. Riley had also learned that the skills she developed as an emergency dispatcher, staying calm under pressure, coordinating complex logistics, and advocating for people in crisis transferred directly to being an effective caregiver for a child with special needs. The legacy Riley's story illustrates the impossible choices that many first responders face between their professional obligations to serve the public and their personal responsibilities to their families. Her 15-year career had saved thousands of lives and provided crucial emergency services to her community, but it had also required sacrifices that affected every aspect of her family life. The accident that changed everything for Riley's family was a random tragedy that could have happened to anyone, but her response to that tragedy, choosing family over career when the two came into conflict, demonstrated the same courage and selflessness that had made her exceptional as an emergency dispatcher. Riley's former colleagues still remember her as the gold standard for professional dispatch work. New dispatchers are trained using recordings of her calls, and her techniques for managing complex emergency responses continue to save lives years after her resignation. But perhaps more importantly, Riley's choice to prioritize Lily's recovery over her career helped ensure that her daughter would have the best possible chance of living a fulfilling life despite her brain injury. The same dedication and expertise that Riley had brought to helping other families in crisis was redirected toward helping her own family navigate their new reality. Lily's continued progress and adaptation represent Riley's most important legacy, not the thousands of strangers she helped during their emergencies, but the daughter she helped heal during the longest emergency of their lives. The final call last month, Riley received an unexpected phone call from the Clark County Emergency Dispatch Center. Tom Crawford, her former supervisor, was calling to offer her a part-time position training new dispatchers and developing emergency response protocols. We've restructured our staffing to allow for more flexible schedules, Tom explained. You could work 20 hours a week, mostly during school hours, focusing on training and protocol development rather than active dispatch. Your expertise is still needed, and this would allow you to contribute without compromising Lily's care. Riley was intrigued by the possibility of returning to emergency services in a role that wouldn't conflict with her family responsibilities. She could share her 15 years of experience with new dispatchers while maintaining her commitment to Lily's ongoing needs. After discussing the opportunity with Marcus and her daughters, Riley decided to accept the part-time position. She would begin working 2 days a week, training new dispatchers and developing improved protocols for handling complex emergency situations. The decision felt like a completion of the circle that had begun with her resignation 3 years earlier. Riley could return to serving her community in a way that honored both her professional expertise and her family commitments. "I'm not the same person who left here 3 years ago," Riley told Tom on her first day back. "But maybe that's exactly what this job needs, someone who understands that the most important emergencies are often the ones happening in our own lives." This has been Justice System USA, where we explore the human cost of serving others and the impossible choices that define our deepest values. Riley Patterson's story reminds us that sometimes the most heroic thing we can do is choose love over duty, family over career, and presence over professional achievement. What did you think about Riley's choice to resign from her career to care for Lily? Have you ever faced a situation where professional obligations conflicted with family needs? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what city you're watching from. If this story moved you to think about the sacrifices that first responders and their families make, hit that like button, share it with someone who appreciates stories of quiet heroism, and subscribe to Justice System USA for more stories that honor the human side of American service. Remember, sometimes the most important emergency we respond to is the one happening in our own home. Until next time, hold your loved ones close, because we never know when everything can change in an instant. See you in the next story.